Can you imagine your life where money is your friend, working with you to achieve all your dreams and desires? If you struggle seeing money as your friend, then join Kathy Cook Noble, financial advisor and educator on understanding how your money can work for you. It is possible. Now, here is Financially Speaking with Kathy Cook Noble.
Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan, and on tonight's episode, we're going to dive into a little bit about budgeting and tracking money. So obviously, this topic is something that is super important to me as a student and as a young adult. And I mean, there's lots to consider. And I say it's a scary topic, or it's one that we don't love talking about, because there's this negative connotation behind money in general. And when you think of budgeting, we always think of it as something negative. We think of it as a restriction on our freedom, right? But ultimately, it's a tool that you can use to be more free later on. And that's sort of where I want to go with this today. So we're going to get a little bit into why budgeting is important, why it's useful, what are some goals that you can achieve through budgeting, and then towards the end, we're going to look at sort of, something that I use every single day to help me stay on track with budgeting and managing my money as a student and as a young adult. And so, the most important thing I think from budgeting is, you can't just you can't just budget for the sake of budgeting, because it doesn't work, right? It's not easy, it's not fun. You have to have some type of goal, and that's that's the hardest part, is figuring out what is your goal. What's the purpose of budgeting? Because if you're just budgeting because somebody tells you to do it, or because you think that it's a good thing to do, I mean, you're really not going to keep it up long term. It's not going to be sustainable. So, the first sort of, I guess, key point of tonight's episode is, when you start budgeting, is to sit down and say, well, why am I doing this? What is the point of this? And what are my goals in terms of coming up with a budget? For me and for other students, right, it's how can I, make the most of the money I have, because tuition's expensive, living's expensive, and when you're out on your own for the very first time, it's hard to manage your money effectively, especially if you haven't had experience doing it in the past, or like a lot of us, our parents haven't really sat us down and showed us effective ways, because sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they just don't want to burden their child with that, which is totally understandable. And one question to ask is why is saving money so hard? Because that's what we're always told, right? It's hard to have a lot of money. It's hard to save money, but it doesn't have to be, and that's where budgeting comes into play. So I encourage everyone who's listening, whether you're a student, whether you're a young adult, teenager, you're an adult, maybe you're 60 plus years old, it doesn't matter. If you're not budgeting already, maybe first consider why you're not doing it. Is it fear of the unknown? That you don't know what you're doing, so you're fearful of trying? Or is it that you're afraid of seeing how much you're actually spending? Which are all viable, explanations, but budgeting is something that it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's a tool, and I use it as a tool, and that's what tonight's episode is going to be about, is how can we use budgeting as a tool to improve our financial situation now, but also our financial situation in the future. And I've said this on episodes in the past. It's something I live by, so I'm going to say it again. You either have it easy now and hard later, or hard now and easy later. And 100 times over, 100% of the time, I'll always choose to grind it out right now, so that my future self in 5, 10, 20, 30 years has it a little bit easier. And that's what's what budgeting is. And so when you think of your goals, sit down and ask yourself, be honest with yourself, what is my goal? Is it to save money? Is it to pay off student debt? Is it to grow, my assets? What is it? It's going to be different for everyone, and that's okay. But it's something that if you don't have a goal, then what's the point? So that's sort of your first step is, sit down and come up with a goal as to why you're budgeting. And, the important thing to remember is that budgeting doesn't have to be a restriction on your freedom. I've talked about this in episodes in the past too, but what I do for budgeting is I follow a rule called the 50-30-20 rule. And we'll get more into it later and how you can actually implement that in your everyday. But it allocates for, essential items, luxury items, and savings. So you can sort of cover all of your bases, but you're not restricting yourself fully. And that gives you a chance to, spend money in the here and now, because ultimately we are living in the present. And we can't totally say that we're not going to spend any money. That's, not sustainable either. But it gives us that chance to, have money for the future as well. And so it's important to identify, what's most important to you. Do you want to spend money now? Do you want to spend it later? And how do you want to spend it? So, the golden rule with budgeting is, how are you going to spend your money? And that's the question, because every month, for the most part, we have the same, we have a steady income. Most of us. Sometimes, that's low, sometimes that's high. It's just depending on our situation. For students, I know that that's usually pretty low because we spend most of our time in the classroom that we don't get paid for. We don't usually have time for a part-time or a full-time job. But, you may have other forms of income, OSAP, maybe your parents help you out, and that's totally great. But identifying what is your income each month, and if it changes, that's fine. But for the most part, that's going to be your steady income every single month. So identifying that, and then breaking it down into, okay, so this is what I have to work with. So how can I spend that? And that's the first step in sort of this budgeting journey. Is if you're only bringing in, for sake of simplicity, let's say $2,000 a month, then you really shouldn't be spending any more than that. You shouldn't be spending more money than you already have. And I know that credit cards and financing and things like that make it really, really appealing and really easy for people to spend money that they don't actually have. But that's where budgeting comes in, is just being mindful of the fact that money is not it's not unlimited. It's not something that just keeps coming up no matter, what your credit card limit is. You're capped. You have a certain amount of money you should be spending each month. And, that's budgeting can help you figure that out and how to be the most successful and the most resourceful with what you do have. And the key here is that the income that you have should always be more than what you're spending. At the very least, it should, balance out and be equal. But if you want to have any form of savings, what you're bringing in should always be more than what you're putting out. And that's sort of the goal. So in considering that, then obviously you've talked about what income, looks like. But the very important piece of the puzzle is what do the expenses look like? Because that tends to fluctuate from week to week and month to month, and even year to year. Expenses of different kinds come up. And, that's where we have to be mindful, is what are we spending money on? Is it something that is essential? Is it something that's a luxury? Are we, allocating it to savings? Are we paying off student debt? How are we spending our money? And why should we be mindful of it? And that's the big part of budgeting that I think is the part that scares people, is they don't want to face, it's the fear of the unknown. If ignorance is bliss in this case, if you're just, tapping your credit card, you're not being mindful of the ways in which you're spending your money. Therefore, you're not looking to change it. But in order to be the most resourceful and the most efficient with the money that you are bringing in, obviously super important to be tracking that and to look at, How can I spend money in ways that is meaningful to myself now, but also meaningful to the lifestyle I want to live in the future? And that's the other thing is, as young people, I know firsthand, we're not super great at looking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. We're more concerned with what's happening 2 days from now, what's happening 2 hours from now. But it's really critical as young people to look at the big picture and figure out what our goal is now and what our goal is for the future. And sometimes you do choose instant gratification. You choose to buy the new laptop just for the sake of having a new laptop now, but 9 times out of 10 it's most efficient to be making the choices that's going to improve your life later down the road, as opposed to right now in this moment. And so when it comes to expenses, it's important to look at which expenses are essential and which are non-essential. And I'm sure all of us would categorize those things differently, but an easy way that I find to break that down is your essential expenses are things that you 100% absolutely have to pay every single month. So your tuition, if you're a student, your rent, if you want to live in a home, utilities, bills, car payments, car insurance, things like that. Those are your essential or necessary items that will be coming out of your income every single month. And in terms of budgeting, that's where most of your money is going to go. And then you have a chance to look at luxuries. So things like concerts, events, entertainment, social events, eating out at restaurants, something everyone loves to do, Starbucks coffee, something that's, super easy for us to grab. And we don't really understand how that $1.89 coffee every single day for a month ends up costing us, $30 to $40 at the end of the month. And the thing to remember is, $30 to $40, it doesn't seem like a whole heck of a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, that $30 to $40 is coming out of your income. So you're spending it on coffee. What are you not spending it on? And that's where this budgeting can be helpful, right? Because 30 years from now, is it going to be more important to you that you had those cups of coffee multiple years ago, or is it going to be more important to you that you have that $30 to $40 could have went into savings or could have went into something later on? And then the third piece of the puzzle is the savings, and that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit. We're getting ready to head into our first break here of the show. When we get back, we will look at more into luxury items and savings and things like that. But for now, you're listening to Financially Speaking. I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan, and we'll be right back after the first break.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan, and you're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. So far tonight, we've been talking about budgeting and tracking money and why that's important, how to make goals about budgeting and tracking money as a young adult, as a student, as an adult, whatever your situation is. And before our break, we were just looking at the difference between essential and luxury or non-essential expenses, and sort of how to prioritize the two. And for most of us, we would say, it's obvious that essential means that, we're spending most of our money on that, or that we're making sure that every month we are taking care of those essential items, whereas the luxury items are something that would come later on with extra money. And, as clear as that may seem, it's easier said than done. It's one of those things, right? It's so tempting to us, when our friends invite us out for lunch or for drinks or whatever, is to spend that money there, as opposed to spending it on, paying off student debt, or towards rent, or towards, a car bill, or whatever the expense is. We're spending it on something that's gonna be pleasurable for us in the moment, as opposed to something that's going to make our lives easier in the future. And that's the beauty of it, is that you ultimately get to choose. The choice is yours, whether your money is spent on things that benefit you, solely in the present, or whether you're spending your money on things that benefit you in the long term. And that's what it comes down to, is what's your mindset. Is your mindset to sort of live fast, die young, so to speak, and spend your money now on the things that instantly gratify you, or is it to be more sustainable and to spend your money in ways that are going to satisfy you for the rest of your life? And so with that, we move into sort of the third component of the budgeting, which is your savings. And as a student, it can be really, really difficult to balance savings with paying off student debt, or maybe you're not faced with student debt yet, but you're in a situation where you can't work, necessarily because you're in school, and you're looking for ways to save money while you're not really bringing anything in. And that's where budgeting can be very, very helpful, because it creates some awareness around how much money you have to work with. It can be very frustrating as a student to sort of, try and figure out how to save money when you're not looking at what's coming in and what's being spent. And ultimately with saving, right, that's the extra, like the leftover, what's left over after we've spent our money on essential items, and after we've spent our money on luxury items. Whatever's left is, should be allocated to savings. And if you're spending more than you're bringing in, your savings are going to be negative, right? You're going to be spending more money. You're not going to be saving anything. And that's the issue that I think a lot of young people face, and they don't realize that just because you have money right in this minute, you got to look at the big picture, and how can I, create a situation where, I can sustain this amount of money for the rest of my life, or for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And I think for students in general, our goal is to, we're not just looking to spend money on school to end up the exact same way we went into school, right? That would just be accumulating a lot of debt for no apparent reason at all, which is not the purpose, right? I mean, sometimes it happens, but that's not the purpose of university or college, or whatever type of school you're in. But the goal is to sort of create a situation where you're going to make more money, or you're going to have more resources after graduation than you would have had you not attended post-secondary. And so that's the thing, right? Is school is an investment in yourself, so that you can have more resources or more financial freedom in the future. And so I would argue that those who are in university or in college have made an investment in themselves for the future. They've chosen, having it easier in the future, and maybe struggling a little bit now with paying for tuition and just being a student, as opposed to taking the easy way out and spending all their money now and or taking a job now and not looking at how they can sustain themselves in the future. But so for savings anyway, it can be a difficult thing for students who are, they're not having any income, they're not bringing anything in or very little in, and it can be frustrating, but there's still a way, and that comes from balancing and budgeting and becoming familiar and comfortable with your financial situation, and also remembering that you're not stuck in that financial situation forever. As a student, you're going to come out of school, hopefully obtain a job that is relevant to what you went to school for, and you're going to be able to spend more and save more over time. But for now, as a student, maybe your income is OSAP, maybe it's a part-time job, maybe it's a TA-ship, maybe your parents help you out with an allowance every month, whatever it is. Sitting down and figuring out, okay, maybe I bring in $1,000 a month. These are my essential expenses. Maybe they cover $500 a month. So I have $500 left over. So how do I want to allocate this? Do I want to spend it on luxury items right away? Do I want to allocate it to savings? And if so, what's the balance between the two? And that's sort of the next important part is, savings is more of a future. It's more of sort of a future goal, whereas luxury items are more of an immediate goal. And there's nothing wrong with one's not better than the other. They're just different. And so when you look at luxury items, it's things that, they would improve your life. Well, for the most part, they improve your life, at this immediate point in time. Whereas savings, it really doesn't benefit you, at this exact moment to put money in a savings account or, to put money aside under your bed or whatever the case is, however your method of saving is, for future you, 30 years from now, or 5 years, or 2 years, or whatever. And that's the hard part about saving, is that we don't instantly receive any sort of reward from it, right? In the immediate moment. But that's the thing, is we receive it long term. So, figuring out what's important to you, the reward, the immediate reward or the delayed reward. And I promise you 9 times out of 10, the delayed reward is the one it's going to be a greater reward. So when it comes to saving, that's the piece of the puzzle that, sometimes changes depending on what your income is and how much, you have to spend in a month. So maybe your income has changed month to month, and that's fine. And maybe your expenses, most certainly your expenses are probably going to change month to month. And so as a result, your savings are going to change as well. But it's about, sort of making a calculation. And I know math is not everyone's favorite thing, but, simple calculations as to how you can come out on top every single month. And I promise you, blindness is not the answer, not going into it and just hoping for the best. I know that's the approach a lot of us like to take, especially young people. But it's not the best approach. And especially if you're not familiar with how your parents have managed their money, or maybe they didn't, manage it very greatly. But this is a way of looking at it, and it doesn't have to be difficult. It's super easy. And I mean, a little bit later on, I'm gonna sort of walk through the process of how I do it. And I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm not saying it's the best way. It's just a way, and it's a way that I found helpful as a student and someone who, is not overly mathematical, somebody who is not overly analytical, but somebody who, cares about the ways in which I spend my money. But there's all kinds of different tools and applications out there that you can use. We always have a smartphone on us 24/7, most of us, right? So, there's apps, there's websites, and there's free things like that. If you're old-fashioned, you can, get the ledger out, the pen and paper. But there's all kinds of tools that you can use out there. Excel, is my sort of application of choice. That's not to say it's better nor worse than anything else. But spreadsheets and things like that are another thing we tend to avoid as young people, because most times that means doing calculations or certain types of analyses that make us feel uncomfortable, and that's fine. But let's embrace it. Let's embrace the discomfort, and start talking about Excel as a tool to help us reach our goals, because that's what it is, right? It's not put in place to hinder us in any way. It's put there as a tool to utilize, in an efficient way. But when it comes down to it, it's like I said before, it's about your goals. And is it your goal to make it easier on yourself later on, or is it your goal to spend everything now and future you can worry about it in 5, 10, 15 years? But I'll tell you what my tip is. And I did discuss it a little bit at the beginning of the podcast, and I've discussed it in a couple of episodes prior to this one, is the 50-30-20 rule. And what that entails is calculating your income, which is the primary thing, is how much am I making, or how much am I bringing in every month, and then breaking that down into, okay, 50% is allocated to essential, 30% I allocate to luxuries, and 20% I allocate to savings. Those numbers can change, they can fluctuate, but this is a simple way, and it's manageable. And that's the thing. It's not super sustainable or realistic, to assume that 100% of what you're bringing in can go to savings. That's probably not accurate anyway, but it's not sustainable to give yourself too much restriction. You have to work within your within your wheelhouse in terms of looking at your spending patterns. If you're someone who spends a lot of money on coffee and things like that, it's unrealistic to just assume that you're not going to spend anything. But we're getting ready to go into our second break. So when we return, we will look exactly at how to make a budget with the 50-30-20 rule. But for now, I'm Ashlee Quinn-Hogan. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be back right after this break.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Money is complicated, right? Actually, no, it's not. You don't have to be a trader on Wall Street to get a handle on your money. TV shows often instill fear to keep you believing you can't understand it or do anything yourself. If dealing with your finances brings up a lot of other F words, then you need to read All Ladies Should Use the F Word, A Guide to Loving Your Finances by Kathy Cook Noble. Kathy helps you take control of your finances and leave the other F word, fear, in the dust.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan, and you're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. Before we left for our second break, we were talking about the 50-30-20 rule. And prior to that, I sort of broke down the importance of looking at your income every month, your expenses and whether they were essential or non-essential expenses, and sort of how to save money as a student. And so, as I promised before the show, I was going to get into a little bit of, how I budget. And one of the methods that I use, it's a pretty common method, especially for those of us that are just starting out. I know a lot of people my age, younger, even if you're older and you just, have never really budgeted before, absolutely no judgment. We're all in the same boat, and the point is to give you guys tools to help you along the way. And so one of my favorite applications to use is Excel, because there's so much you can do on it, and it's one of those tools that's made to be a budgeting tool, or it's made to be like a financial tool. And so sort of your first step in creating one of these spreadsheets is what I like to do is have you can create a workbook for yourself on Excel. And what that looks like is I always create one for the year. So I have a different sheet for January, February, March, and all of the months. And in there, sort of where I keep my individual sort of ledgers for my income and my expenses. And what that looks like is, you always start with your income. Like I said before, your income is something that mostly, for most of us, is stable every month. Sometimes there's a bit of a difference. I know for young people and for students, there can be quite a difference. But figuring out what that is for you. Where does your money come from? Does that come from OSAP? Does it come from a part-time job? Does it come from a full-time job? Does it come from scholarships? Does it come from bursaries, awards? Do mom and dad help you out with an allowance every month? Whatever that is, that's what goes in your income section, and that's always at the top of my ledger because it's always the first thing I consider. Okay, so if I'm going to be spending money this month, I need to know how much money I have to spend, because as we said already, under no circumstance should you be spending more money than you have available to you, regardless of how many credit cards and what your limits on those credit cards are. But so, looking at your income and listing the things out that, provide you with money every month. So maybe as an example, we have OSAP, we have a part-time job, and, maybe mom and dad help us out with an allowance. And that gives us, our total income. So, and that number I always have highlighted, bolded, circled. I have it standing out in some way because that's, I know that that's my limit. And I should never ever be spending more than that. The less I spend, the more I save. So, when you're looking at your income, that's sort of the one you want to pay attention to the most. And then, I break it down into expenses. And, I'm a big fan of color coding, but you can choose to do it in any way that you would like. When you look at expenses, there's sort of two categories. There's essential and there's non-essential. or, you know, necessities and luxuries. And for the most part, you know, we tend to have, or I say we should have more necessities than luxuries. But you know, luxuries are those things that, you know, make life worth living. And you know, it's unrealistic to say you're never going to be able to purchase those things, because you know, what would be the point if, you know, you didn't have you know, lunch to go out with, you know, to go out for lunch with friends, or you know, golfing, or whatever your hobby is. Those are things that, you know, yeah, they're not essential, but they are considered luxuries, but they're things that, you know, make our life, you know, worth it. So by no means am I saying to completely restrict yourself on that grounds. I'm all for, you know, spending money on things that are not deemed essential, but you know, in an appropriate way, and in a way that is not going to hurt you in the future. So I always do my necessities first, because they're the first thing to consider, and they're, you know, the first thing that I want to make sure I have covered, you know, when the end of the month comes and the bills come in. And so where this 50-30-20 rule comes in is the necessities should be 50% of your income. So things like car insurance, cable, internet, your cell phone, you know, if you have gym membership, groceries, gas, things like that, that you absolutely have to have every single month. Those things are, you know, should be 50% of your income. So for sake of argument, let's just say every month you're bringing in $2,000. That's an easy number to work with. So 50% of 2,000 is 1,000. So, you know, your necessities should be around $1,000. If it's less, fantastic. If it's more, not super ideal, but also not the end of the world. Just knowing where you are is the big step, right? You know, there's no judgment behind it. It's all, you know, knowledge and being aware of where you stand. So after I figured out the necessities, that's where the 30 comes in, your luxuries. I always list those second, because those are, you know, the things I consider second after the necessities have been taken care of. And I like to allocate 30% of my income to luxuries. So that's things like, you know, food and drinks that, you know, are not part of your groceries, that are just, you know, going out for ice cream with friends, grabbing a coffee, or, you know, a beer after work, or whatever the case is. You know, trips, you know, outings, activities, shopping, clothes shopping, you know, beauty things, all of that. And that always falls into luxuries. And the interesting thing about luxuries is, like, we always want to spend the most there. It's super gratifying to just, you know, spend as much as we can on making our life super enjoyable right now, which is, you know, I think everyone would say that. I don't think anyone would restrict themselves if they didn't have to. I know I wouldn't if I had, you know, an unlimited amount of money to spend. There's no doubt in my mind that I would, you know, go out for beers every single day of the week. You know, go on all the vacations I could imagine. But you know, most of us, if not all of us, we don't have that unlimited amount of money. So you know, that's where 30% comes in. Is 30% of what you bring in every single month should, you know, go towards your luxuries. And you know, this is where I call it the 50-30-20 rule, but there is a little bit of leniency. If, you know, your necessities are costing a little bit less than 50%, maybe they're costing about 40%. Then you have that extra 10% to decide, you know, do I want to, you know, put that into luxuries or savings, right? It's all about, you know, figuring it out and laying it out. And that's why I like Excel as a tool, is because you can actually see where your money is being spent. And that's the whole point of budgeting, right? Is to see, you know, in which ways your money is being spent. Because as much as you think that you know when you're spending it, we really don't, right? We tap our cards, you know, hundreds of times a day. And it's not until we sit down and really look at the ways in which we spend money that we're like, oh my goodness, I've spent $60 on coffee this month. Whereas that $60 could have been put into paying off, paying a bill or paying off a debt, or just going into savings. And speaking of savings, that's our final component on the ledger, on the Excel spreadsheet, is and that's the final part of the 50-30-20 rule, is the 20% goes into savings. And what savings looks like for you could be, putting it in a piggy bank on your dresser, putting it into some type of banking account, tax-free savings account, could be investing. It's whatever you're comfortable with, and it might change over time. You might start off, putting it into a regular, bank account with your bank. You might, over time transition into a tax-free savings account, or you might transition into, setting up some type of investment to put that into every month. And when it comes to savings, I always like to highlight that one in, green, or a color that's super motivating to me. That I know that the bigger that number is at the end of the month, the more I'm, the more I've improved my life for the future. And so that's where, color coding also comes into consideration. You can kind of see, how you're spending your money now, and the ways that it's affecting you in the future. But that's the basis of the 50-30-20 rule, and it's a super easy thing to do. And the best part is so you list all of your potential expenses, your necessities, your luxuries, your savings, and then you go over and say, how much do I want to budget towards this? And that's the tricky part, is figuring out how much is this thing worth to me at this specific moment. So things like car insurance or cell phone bills they're pretty set in stone. So maybe your cell phone bill is $50 a month. Well, then that's an easy input to put into Excel, because it's not something that tends to fluctuate very often. Whereas things like groceries and gas, they're necessities, but they're also, they fluctuate from month to month depending on what you buy, when you buy it, and where you buy it, right? So budgeting something, a certain amount, or allocating a certain portion of your income to those things might take some trial and error, and that's okay too, as long as you're cognizant of the fact that you're making an effort to budget effectively there. And then your luxuries is where it's really going to fluctuate, is where it's going to take a lot of self a lot of dedication and self-discipline to allocate money there. And what that looks like is looking at your current spending patterns. So how much do I currently spend on entertainment and eating out and spending time with friends and shopping, and all those things, and how much should I be spending, and allocating a certain month or a certain amount each month, and cutting yourself off. So maybe right now you're looking at your past bank statements and you spend $200 a month on shopping, but you can only really afford to spend $100 a month. So what's a happy medium there? Do you want to allocate 200 and knowing that it's it's outside of our confines, or do you want to allocate the 100? Totally up to your discretion. We are going to head into our next break, and we'll finish chatting about allocating money to certain things when we get back. But for now, I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this break.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm Ashlee Quinn Hogan, and you're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. Right before we headed into break, I was sort of getting into the ways in which you can allocate money for the purpose of budgeting, and I was discussing, sort of our non-essential or luxury spending and how to go about allocating money towards that, because I would argue that that's the most difficult part of budgeting is, restricting ourselves from spending too much on, the stuff that we want to spend it on the most, obviously. What all that takes is sitting down, being honest with yourself and looking at, your bank statements from the past and seeing how much you've spent on, those luxury items. So food and drink, trips, things like that, shopping, activities, going to the movies, whatever the case is. Sitting down and being honest with yourself about, okay, if I spend, $400 on social events this month, and I spent $300 on social events the previous month, how can I make sure that, I'm staying within my, within the region that, is effective for me, so that I can not overspend going forward. And, it might take a little bit of dedication. It might take a little bit of honesty to get yourself to that point, and that's okay, right? Like, it's a learning curve. Starting budgeting is a learning curve. And I know for me anyway, when I first started, it took, the first couple of months or the first 3 or 4 months to sort of get the hang of, okay, I was spending, X amount of dollars every month, let's say $200 every month. That wasn't sustainable. I knew going into it that I was overspending in that area. Let's say it's on food and drink, because I'm definitely guilty of getting the coffees in the morning instead of just making it at home. So let's say that it was that. By the way, if you're spending $200 a month on coffee, you're either buying really expensive coffee or you're drinking way too much. But we're going to go with it. To sit down and say, okay, maybe that's how I spent in January, but in February, I'm going to try and cut that down by $20 a month. March, I'm going to cut it down by, $50 a month, and working your way down to that, that part that number that's achievable for you. It's not something to judge yourself about. It's not something to get down about. It's a learning curve. And, as young adults, we have time on our side. We're not expected to know everything, right off the hop. And it's not necessary that we do. It's about learning throughout our experience. So when it comes to luxuries, I've been in budgeting for a while, so I know how much I tend to spend, or how within reason, and I can limit myself to that. And then when it comes to savings, that's sort of what's left over, and how you want to deal with that is up to you, whether you want to invest it, whether you want to, stick it in a savings account. Like I said, if you have a piggy bank and that's your method of saving, then that's totally fine. But then, the other important component of the budget, so now you've allocated, money to be spent. So then at the end of the month, you look at how much you actually did spend and are you following it? Because the interesting thing about budgeting is it only works if you actually do it. So, you can go through and make these beautiful spreadsheets all you want. If at the end of the month, the amount you're actually spending is, not even close to the amount that you budgeted, then and obviously it's not going to do what you want it to. So I always have my budget just open on my computer, and when I, spend a certain amount of money, I input it into my spreadsheet. Another reason why Excel is so great is, you can save your changes. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it over time, and you can sort of see that number go up. So, if you have 2 columns being amount budgeted and amount spent, you can see how close you get to your sort of confine every month. And for me, that helps me to see it. It helps me to see that, okay, I'm halfway through the month. It's July 15th, and I've spent 3/4 of what I've budgeted. So I know that for the next half of the month, I really have to pump the brakes on that a little bit. Or it's towards the end of the month, and I've only spent about half of what I thought I was going to spend. So maybe I'll have more savings than I thought, or maybe the fact that I went over budget on gas this month is not going to be the end of the world. But the amount spent is the number that you want to pay attention to, because in the end, if the amount spent is way more than the amount that you budgeted, it's just it's not going to be, you're not going to get the outcome you want. So that's like the basis of it, right? It's just those easy steps going through, okay, how much am I bringing in? What's my income? Okay, what are my essential expenses? What are my non-essential expenses? And then after that, how much do I want to allocate to savings? And then as you go through the month, making sure you follow how much you allocate and how much you actually spend, because that's where it's going to come into play, and that's the part that you're going to have to adjust as you get used to it. Maybe you have no experience budgeting, maybe you have a ton, and you're just here to listen. But that's neither here nor there. What you want to look at is how are you achieving your goals? Because at the end of the day, the amount that you're budgeting is a goal you're setting for yourself. Can I keep myself within these constraints? And at the end of the month, you're going to see whether you can or you can't, and you're going to have to adjust accordingly. If you don't have a ton of self-discipline, it's going to be a long road, and that's totally fine. Maybe you have a great amount of self-discipline, and you can put those restrictions in place within reason. And like I said, no one expects you to absolutely just restrict yourself to the max. That's not sustainable at all, but it is important to make sure that what you are spending your money on is what you think you're spending your money on. And that's the whole point of budgeting, right? Is if you're not spending your money on X, or if you're spending your money on X, you're not spending it on Y. So be very, be very knowledgeable of what you're spending your money on. And that's the point of this episode, is to make sure that everyone, is familiar with budgeting. And if you want to learn to budget, then here's an easy way to do it, right? The 50-30-20 rule talked about sort of, how to look at your income, how to look at your expenses, and how to prioritize which expenses come first. But yeah, that's all I have for you for today's episode. If you liked this episode, feel free to refer it to a friend, show it to a friend, send it to a friend, or if you know anyone who is not familiar with budgeting and who should be more familiar with budgeting, feel free to show it to them. If you have questions about anything I chatted about today, feel free to reach out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those platforms. I'm happy to chat on there. But I'm going to leave you today with one final message, and that is to make it a goal to make every day a fantastic day, and to make sure you're learning something new every single day. And that is all we have for you for tonight. I'm Ashlee on the Financially Speaking podcast on the Financially Network.
Thank you for choosing to listen to Financially Speaking Radio Show. Kathy Cook Noble will return next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by making the choices that bring you all that you desire.